The Genesis Talks is like a beating heart of ideas and connections. Conversations with visionaries, luminaries that never lets us get complacent. Welcome, Jeff. It's so great to have you here. This is exciting for me because this is one of the first formal presentations about the new building and our opening, and it could not be more fitting on this occasion to be talking with you for many reasons. The official reason for this now is that part of the new project will include an incredible sculpture by Jeff Koons, the Split Rocker. 45,000 plants have been planted. We're going to let them grow a little bit for the opening in the spring. We can talk a little bit about that. And thanks to the generosity of Linda and Stuart Resnick, this will be here forever. We're going to talk about that. But we're going to talk about some other things. I have so many questions for you. People may not know, some people may remember that I kind of came to LA with you in the sense that we were in New York in 2005 talking about the waterfront of New York and your train crane sculpture and how it might grace the river as DIA Art Foundation was planning a building right there at the time. And then when the opportunity came to LA, I think I called you right away and says, let's do something in LA since I know you love LA. You've been here a lot, right?
Yes. For many years, I was making, many of my sculptures here in Los Angeles. I made my balloon dogs here, and I was working with a company called Carlson. And so I was spending a lot of time here.
So my first day on the job, which was April 1st, 2006, I was in Renzo Piano's studio in Paris, and he was looking at his drawings, and I was like, we need to make room for a Jeff Koons. So my hair was black then. Entirely. So I think we could date the longevity of our process of thinking. And we did some work on that project. And honestly, when the opportunity came up between us for Split Rocker sculpture, I think it was one of the images that you had made that I loved the most. And I was so excited that we could bring one here. So I would love to talk a little about that image. So the Split Rocker, it was in Versailles, and then it was as part of a larger presentation. It was in Rockefeller Center. I'm being there with my kids and my family and admiring it going up. And then we thought, what a great thing if it moved to Los Angeles. Like, who wouldn't want to move to the good weather in Los Angeles, especially if you're a flower sculpture, which otherwise in the winter has to go to sleep. So just to talk a little bit about the nature of it, you reconceived it for Los Angeles with the plant material. So usually the Split Rocker, you plant in the spring, it grows, and then it goes to sleep in the winter in the East Coast in Europe. But here the idea is it's going to be year-round. And I think we played, I mean, there are 45,000 plants, but they're very different from the ones that have been in Europe and New York, right?
That's correct. So usually I'm using annuals. And so I'd be using geraniums and impatiens and all these tagetes, different plants like that. But we really wanted to create Split Rocker, that it was dealing with the environment that it's in here in Los Angeles, and to use succulents and perennials so that the piece would be more sustainable and within its environment to be using more indigenous plants. I just want to give a little bit of a history on it, Michael. The first kind of topiary piece that I made was Puppy. And I made Puppy in 1992. And I originally made it in Europe outside of Basel and in this town called Arleston. And there I used annual plants. But I didn't ever make another large public piece until making Split Rocker, because I wanted to make something that I felt was worthy of making. And I originally showed it for the first time in Palais de Pulp in Avignon, France. And I don't know if you recall, but this is a place where Picasso had his last really large exhibition of his late paintings. And so I always felt very close to Split Rocker. I think it has a dialogue also with Picasso and Roy Lichtenstein. But it's a piece that I've always felt close to.
Yeah, it's I got to see Puppy, and because I was involved in the Guggenheim Bilbao, it's there and it graces that space. And I remember when I saw Split Rocker, because Puppy is adorable. Like, it's so welcoming, and it has that history of topiary sculpture and the idea of just looking at a living sculpture on that scale. But Split Rocker's kind of weird. Like, it's really strange, and it was so attractive to me because I couldn't figure, it had so many angles on it. So the obvious thing, you talked about Picasso and that situation, and it was so appropriate. And you notice there's an eye on one side and then an eye in the front. And it's like obviously like a Picasso painting, right? A cubist, which is an intentional reference or one you found, but it's so cubist. Also, even that it's split, because cubists were always splitting time, looking at things from different directions. And I know you're always looking at art and art history and making those references. Was the cubism thing something that was immediate, or did you kind of discover it? Because I know you were looking down at your toys. Like, where was that spark of creativity?
I was looking at toys of my one son, and they were in my bedroom at home. And I looked over here, and there was this blue rocking horse, and it was made out of polyethylene, a plastic, and it's somewhat soft curves, and it had this handlebar, yellow handlebar going through the head. And I looked over on the other side of the room, and there was this dinosaur, and it had the same handlebar going through the head. And I thought, it would be interesting just to divide these two rockers right down the center and to put them together and let this profile where the two outlines don't line up to experience that. And that's where Split Rocker came from. Now, all of my work really comes from just very intuitive of looking at the world and being open to everything. So I was open to it, and I loved the idea of, how do you describe that split other than just experiencing it? And I thought about Picasso, of course, because, the dino has a big kind of oval eye, and the pony has a different eye looking a different direction. That's a circle. But I was also thinking about Roy Lichtenstein, who would make 2D, 3D sculpture. And there's form. I mean, this split is a sense of form. It's there, it's not there, but there is a sense of form. And I thought Roy would enjoy the split that's going from the front of the piece all the way up over around to the back. I'd also like to just say, Michael, that I grew up in York, Pennsylvania. And in York, there was a shoe house. And this gentleman, he was a shoe salesman, and his name was Haynes. And he built a shoe house. And so when I was a kid growing up, I would look and I'd see this big shoe house, and I really loved it. And it was this fantasy architecture. I think Los Angeles,
On Derby, things like that, right?
That's right. And so I think that Split Rocker is in that tradition, because I think of it as having this sense, at least in some manner, communicating a shelter, that it's a place that's offering in a way to not only in a way make itself whole, because I think the piece is about oneness. It's like a Maria Therese Picasso. You could have one side of the face be a moon and the other could be the sun, or you can have one side of a face be kind of masculine, the other feminine, and you're bringing two things together. But a sense of oneness, I think, is automatically also within the sculpture.
The split, I mean, you just referenced cubism, you have the shelter, but the split is sort of it's everywhere in ancient art, this idea of the split, whether it's the sun and the moon, yin and yang, masculine, feminine. Some people have compared it to like a Janus figure. There's this idea of a two-headed, it's an ancient symbol where you have two heads looking in two directions, like the eyes, one is looking to the past and one is looking to the future. And I feel like somehow you seized upon this like lineage of human history of playful binaries that are different, but not exactly the same. And I think that's what attracted me to the split. That it conjures everything from ancient art to possible futures, which I'm sure was equally delightful when you like had that idea. You must smile when you get that idea, right?
Yes, but I'm smiling now because I enjoy what I'm hearing you say, because I enjoy inside and outside. I mean, if we look at these balloon pieces, one of the reasons that I make them is the anthropomorphic quality in a way, because our internal being, the inside, and then the external world on the outside, our membrane that we have is the skin. And here in these balloon pieces, you'll have what looks like that it's a vinyl or it's this membrane of the rubber. But it's emphasizing that in our being, if we think inside, it's kind of dense. There's blood, there's organs, there's a density there. But if we think of the interior of these balloon works, it's kind of vacuous. And all of a sudden, it's a reversal where the external world seems denser. So if you look at a balloon piece, you look, it's kind of empty inside. And if that's empty inside, that means everything around us has more density. And that makes us feel, in a way, a little more secure. And it's kind of doing a reversal. But Split Rocker also has this inside-outside, that shelter part, or the idea of these openings where you can go in. Again, is this dialogue of inside-outside. Culture. Culture is really nothing more than our beings in some manner making gestures, having some relationship with the external world. And John Dewey, I love John Dewey, the philosopher, but he always speaks that true communication is, he'll talk about single-cell organism having an effect from the external environment, but then in return, it affects the environment. And this back and forth is communication. This is what culture is. And a lot of times we start to develop ideas that culture is a hierarchy, but it's not. That's some fabrication that somehow has crept into the picture, when culture is nothing more than this discourse, this communication of our internal being and the dialogue with the external world. There are no judgments. Culture doesn't judge. And I think Split Rocker is within that dialogue. And the reason that it deals with form the way it does, the way it presents itself within a minimalistic tradition, even though it's kind of figurative, is to be in this non-judgmental role, and to try in some manner to communicate that, and to communicate the glory, the beautiful quality of life and of being a human being, and accepting, how we have perception of the world and how we can perceive hope for ourselves, how we have an essence of our potential to be excited by nature.
I'd like to continue on that life theme because, I've known your work since International Without Monument, like in the early days, the basketballs I followed your work. I was such a fan as a young person, and I saw it evolve. And early on, I was interested in those images that were kind of about life, kind of about fecundity and birth, and even the egg that we showed at BCAM. We showed the egg, the bunny, the balloon dog, and the tulips in 2008. But this idea of life, we were talking today about how the world is sort of being taken over maybe by robots and AI and things that are mechanical. And yet a lot of your work has been about the essence of human feeling and life. And I felt like when you started to make these living sculptures, it was a kind of breakthrough of images about it to a sculpture that was literally alive and needed to be cared for, which seems to be a through line in a lot of your work. And there's this living quality to the sculpture it's one of its greatest essences. We even have to care for it like a being.
Michael, it's funny because the first time that I started to have a dialogue more about biology was my Equilibrium series. And prior to Equilibrium, I was showing work for its newness. So I would encase vacuum cleaners for their newness. Everything had to be pristine and clean. And I would use a kind of white fluorescent light to display its newness. And I became really tired of cleaning these objects all the time. And I wanted to also deal with things in a more of a biological way and show also a more masculine side also of consumerism. So I wanted to work with basketballs, and I would put them in aquariums, and I would sometimes have 50-50 tanks. Half the tank was empty, and there would just be, air on the top of the tank, and then the bottom would be filled with water, and exactly half the basketball would be submerged in the water. Other times, the basketball would be in complete equilibrium within the tank. But when I would have more than 2 basketballs in a tank, when I would put 3 basketballs in a tank, they would move. And basketballs would always be moving in the tanks due to vibration or even the light. If the sun came up on the east side and the tank got some light, it would, the ions would be moving the balls over to the other side. And so the balls would be moving, and I thought this is like the development of thought patterns. And that was the first time that I started to not only want to reference biology and to reference that these basketballs were like embryos in the womb, but at the same time, they were the development of thought patterns.
That theme of the life, biology seems to run through the next series of works in lots of different ways. And I mean, Split Rocker as a living sculpture is sort of the essence of that. The Resnicks had to leave us a maintenance endowment because those plants need to be cared for. And I think it's so kind of loving, this idea of caring for the life and having a living sculpture. Also that, as you've said sometimes, artists are often trying to create order, which is a geometry of sculpture, but you specifically knew that the plants would get out of control, out of order. And so there is another duality in the split, right, between order and the chaos of life that ensues.
Well, as Michael's mentioned, there are 45,000 plants. And there are also different areas within the sculpture, at least the way it's planted right now. It can't be planted incorrectly. But I did a design that's an idealized design, and that it has different areas where I have dark values, I have mid-darks, I have mids, mid-lights, and lights. And I have it for a certain color range for the dino and one for the pony. And so there's a lot of control. So if there are 45,000 plants, there are 45,000 decisions just with the planting of the piece. So there's a lot of control that goes into the realization of a work like Split Rocker. But then the beauty of it is that at a certain point, after the plants are there, you walk away from it. And it's just in the hands of nature. And certain plants are going to want to dominate, and they're going to want to move out and try to take over territory to their right and to their left. Others are going to try to shoot out further. You're going to have the chaos of just bees pollinating and butterflies and birds nesting and how that starts to affect the environment. And so the beauty is exercising control, but also giving up control and seeing the beauty in that, because it's also affirming that there's certain places in our life that control's really important. I mean, if we want to go about tomorrow in a certain way, we have certain appointments or things we want to accomplish, We have to have a certain order and control. But when it comes to human relationships, there's no place for control. So I think this is the dialogue that we're all open to and that we enjoy. We enjoy feeling it. It's a life cycle. I mean, these are perennial plants that we have. They're going to be coming back, but you have the different sense of the seasons and of change taking place. And it's the acceptance of the beauty of nature and of time and of adaptability.
I think a lot of what that is, too, this interest that many people have in gardens to tend a living thing and then to order it. I mean, a lot of things about this sculpture conjure art history, whether you intended them or not. I mean, there's a whole history of topiary sculpture that goes back to Roman times, of this interest in also having a dialogue with shaped nature. And then in the 19th century, it was popular to have these patterned gardens that were similarly with thousands of plants and orders and patterns. And somehow you've now taken one of those and wrapped it around this whole form in 3 dimensions. But I think about the primal nature of it, of the impulse to garden and shape and dialogue with nature. But the other primary thing about it is this archaic sense of the frontal figure that you have that's split. But it's something I've always noticed in so many of your sculptures. For me, they look sometimes like sphinxes, or it's like Balloon Dog sits there as an oracle. The bunny comes right at you frontally. I joke that these are like our guardians for the museum, because they sort of face frontally. And I'm interested in that impulse. I mean, I think of it as a kind of ancient thing, that there are sculptures of animals and natures that have this frontal, archaic quality. Do you think about that with some of these sculptures, or is that just a natural thing? Because you've done it with a lot of these images. The swan, they kind of like face straight on.
The colossal size, automatically brings to mind, sculptures of the ancient world, and something that would maybe be considered one of the wonders, or as you mentioned, like a sphinx. So, the scale is something which I think helps bring that about, that it's a communal piece. It's not a piece just for the individual to contemplate, but it's for a community. I think that the scale also has, it's architectural, but there's something that I find also kind of celestial within it. I find like the side of the head of the dino to almost, reference like a moon or a planet, or the type of movement that takes place. The openings, I think, bring out the aspect of sky. I mean, you look up to it, you see the sky. But it does have that tie to mythology and to the ancient world, and kind of the enjoyment of awe and wonder.
It's been called like a smiling chimera, like a being made of multiple things, which is also an ancient idea. But yet it's this giant thing. It's 200 pieces of steel, 400 planter boxes, computer drip system. I don't know how many tons of earth. Like, don't try this at home. It's really complicated. And actually, we didn't have the full instruction manual, so there was a lot of learning that took place in reassembling this. So you have this big scale, and I feel like it is the Sphinx. But on the other hand, what's sort of beguiling about it is the toy-like, childlike quality. I had this imagination that it would, kids who were at the tar pits looking at the fiberglass mammoths. And by the way, everybody says it's tar pits. Where the dinosaurs are. I was like, no, it's not dinosaurs. It's Ice Age mammals. But finally, we brought a dinosaur here to Wilshire Boulevard. After long last for all the kids, I had this other dream. There's the Picasso horse in Chicago. And as a kid, I remember looking out the window of my parents' car and like wanting to go see it. So my dream is that will happen in LA. Some kid will look, Mom and Dad, I need to go, or the caretaker, I need to go see that thing, whatever it is. So this childlike quality. So the childlike quality is real, right? And there's something beautiful and also intimate. You conceived this piece actually when your son, you were struggling a little bit, right, with fatherhood and the complexities of real life. And, it's not all happiness. There's some, it ends that way. It's like a happy story, but there's some pain involved in like the longing, the protection of children that one wants to care for.
When we were speaking about a mythic scale, I was starting to understand that the size of the plants and the life energy, the growth of those plants. And, if you look closely and it speeds up in a way because of the colossal size, and you have these small little elements, it lets us feel that type of life energy. The sun is hitting on it. You can feel almost the growth taking place, with the bee coming over and pollinating, or the butterfly coming over here. You feel that sense of growth. And we can relate that to our own essence of our potential. I always like to bring up that, the art is never in the object. So if you look at a work of art and we call it art, it's really just a transponder. It's something that can excite you, it can stimulate you. But what the art is the essence of your own potential. It's that excitement. If you can think of life energy in the sense of the growth, it's that growth within you. It's your future. It's what you can become in that moment, or what you can see yourself becoming. That's the art. That's the only thing of value. Hopefully a split rocker can be something that can excite and stimulate and bring that about. And I think that part of it is the scale, not only the scale of the piece itself, but that the living organism, the scale of the plant, that you can look at it and you can feel that growth almost in front of your eyes at that moment. And you are seeing it. You're experiencing it.
Yeah. No, that you really feel the life. And also the bigness comes down to the plant, this big. So, Robert Irwin talked about that when he was talking about his designs for the Getty Garden and his decisions to use plant material, because he wanted to mediate the gaze from the sky to something that was like tiny. And I feel like Split Rocker does that too. And by the way, the team has been reporting there are butterflies and bees on Wilshire Boulevard all of a sudden surrounding your sculpture. So that sense of like inspiring real life is really there. But I do want to ask a little about the childhood toy. And you became a father. It was complicated. And there's always this sort of like wanting to care for children, and the toy is a sort of stand-in, right, for that love and care.
I started my celebration series before that I ran into a custody situation with my one son. So I'd already started making a balloon dog and a hanging heart, a cat in a clothesline. And I end up at a certain point, like making a split rocker as a piece that these were rocking horses that were left behind. It was a parental abduction. But I don't think that the piece was just about, this kind of split or something that took place. It had to do, for me, more about the masculine and the feminine and different aspects of our personality. I know coming here tonight, I would like to be myself. I'd like to be myself as an artist for you here. I hope that's what I am. I don't know. I may not be. I may be some presentation of just myself in a different way. But we have these things throughout our lives every moment. And so I think that Split Rocker also, captures that. Like, what type of presentation are we making? So I don't really think the piece is kind of gravitated within that type of dialogue. Even though looking at those two, I can think about one side kind of possibly more masculine, one side could be looked at as more feminine. But again, I can look back at a Picasso painting of like young Paulo there with the mother, and yet you look at this side of the head is also, it's like the father there too.
Yeah. Well, but it is interesting that it falls in this tradition of art that is about, it is also about childhood, right? Because they are toys. And so these images conjure that. Doing it on a big scale.
And Michael, one other thing, like we're talking about nature and butterflies and these plants growing, but there's violence in nature and there's violence in our lives. There are things that we have to learn how to adapt to and how to overcome.
Well, I think the split it means so many different things. It's not like it means one thing. I feel like it's also just a fissure in thinking about life in a more complex way, too, because it has all those things involved. And somehow having this bifurcated thing made up of different things is like a statement that it's complicated. And there's lots going on at once, which is...
And the line, that split, is form. I mean, we think about form as being a solid, but if we look at it as form, it can also be that kind of the negative shape that just matter of air is located. It has to do with almost like, again, defining a line as form. You know?
So one of the things that I was interested in when I came to Los Angeles, first and foremost, was how could we put art outside because of the good weather? And I spent a year of my life living in Rome among public sculpture and architecture. And I just loved wandering the streets and seeing, an elephant around the corner that was in marble made in the 16th, 17th century. And I imagined that LACMA was going to be this urban set of plazas with public sculpture. But public sculpture is hard, I would say. I think there's a lot of public sculpture that fails on lots of levels. It's a hard task. It's something you've actually attempted very successfully. I mean, the puppy was like an instant success. This has been amazing. I was in Doha to see your dugong sculpture. It was commissioned for the World Cup in Doha. And I think the idea is you're making it out of metal now. But again, like a big challenge to make a big scale thing. Can you, and it's going to be there forever. So public sculpture is a big challenge.
The dugon's 124 feet long by 80 feet high. The sculpture itself, not the base, but I wanted to make it in metal, but I didn't have enough time to realize it. So I had it manufactured in the Netherlands, and it's a balloon, but it's very highly engineered. And, a balloon, all the forces, because of the air pressure, it just wants to go round. That's the form that it wants to take. So to be able to get the type of form that we were looking at, it was designed really well. But I was thinking about, in designing it, how I could make sculpture somewhat in an Art Deco tradition. If you think of the type of cladding of figures that you could see large scale on Art Deco buildings, of using metal sheets and bending it to be able to realize some large scale sculptures. So the dugon is being made. It's being made in stainless steel and will be colored to look like it does. But the citizens of Qatar in Doha, they thought it was stainless steel. They were surprised.
I did too, by the way. Yeah. When I saw it, I was like, wow, they built that just already?
And when the piece, we told them that it would last for sure 6 months. It lasted a year and a half. And when it came down, the public really wanted the dugong back. Dugong, by the way, it's a mammal. It's like here in the United States, we have manatees. I don't know if you're familiar with manatees in Florida, but it's a sea cow. And so I was speaking about my equilibrium tanks a little earlier, but I would go to aquarium stores always looking at tanks, like for a 3-bowl tank, do I want, a 45-gallon, or for a single one, do I want a 30-gallon? But I always loved the little figurines, the little vegetation or the little ship at the bottom of the aquarium and the little animals. So, I sculpted that, the dugong, to be able to look the way it does. But I thought that making one so large was almost like bringing one of these little ornaments from the inside of an aquarium into the outside world, more than taking something from the sea and, just bringing it up above land.
Do you have for yourself like a for public sculpture and the big responsibility to make something, we go into a museum, it's a safe space. People tell you it's art. You're going in to see art. You somehow are more open to it because, art's weird. But when you're out in public, you can risk the ire, the questions of the public. And so for you, do you have a criteria of what it means to make a public sculpture as opposed to one that sits inside a gallery? Do you strive for it to be somehow different? Is there some criteria? Do you love other public sculptures for certain reasons?
I enjoy public sculptures. I enjoy all art. I love art, all different time periods. And I've always enjoyed being an artist. When I was young, and I started taking lessons when I was 7, and I never knew what art was. I learned how to draw very realistically. I'd win awards locally, and I ended up going to art school because I wasn't really prepared to do anything other than art. I was always in art class, but I had no idea what art was. To me, it was really an activity that probably just created anxiety in me. But when I went to college, I had my first art history lesson. And when my teacher started to speak about Manet painting Olympia and started to describe and talk about, the black cat over in the far right corner within 19th century France could be representing this aspect, and the bouquet of flowers could be representing this, and the woman's in the same position as Goya. I felt so fortunate. I felt like my life changed. I felt like the luckiest person ever because I realized that art was something that could connect me so effortlessly to all the human disciplines. And I could be involved in philosophy and psychology and physics, sociology, aesthetics, theology, just everything. And my life has never ceased to have that type of excitement and joy from that moment. And that's why I'm involved with art. And the way, once getting involved and starting to learn how you can control, the chemicals that flow through your body, the secretions of different chemicals from your brain, the excitement that you make something, it's like, whoa, And you make these things for your own pleasure. But there's a certain point, and this is where the world likes to kind of play games with you. The critics, they'll say, but that work, it's made for other people. It's like somebody wants to be loved. You make it because you want to be loved or something. Instead, there's a certain point, like all of us, with a certain moment in your life, you realize a responsibility to your community. And it's like, growing up that you want to do something, you want to serve. It's not that you want to be loved, you want to serve. And that's the beauty of public sculpture, because it lets you serve that, in the most open way where people may not normally maybe go to the museum or run across your work. But all of a sudden, here you have that opportunity just that somebody can be confronted by it. And that hopefully in some manner you can change their life.
I think that is potentially the beauty of a public sculpture of art. Well deserved. Actually, we had a bouquet of tulips at the entrance of LACMA in 2008. And of course, now it's morphed into real plants. You think, who can not love flowers? And I did think of Split Rocker as also a bouquet in front of the museum. Like, it's very traditional. We actually have a flower endowment because it's traditional to put flowers inside a museum or in the lobby or whatever. So I thought of it as our big bouquet. One image here is, speaking of public sculpture, is the project in Paris with the tulips and the hand, which was your gift to Paris, actually. Catherine and I were there recently. It's a sort of beloved sculpture now, but it had a rough go at the beginning. And I want to just say there's also the perils of public sculpture and public opinion. So while now it's kind of already loved, but it had a rough go, right? You offered this gift and it wasn't like immediately accepted.
That's correct.
Even though it's flowers,
yeah,
like who rejects flowers? But
and you have to understand also, Michael. I just spoke about how art changed for me when I started to understand that it was something that can just be this vehicle that can enlighten so easily. And that was through looking at a French artist, looking at Manet, and so French culture, the idea of the avant-garde. It was really that, you can change your life, but then you can also change the life of the community. And so so I've always had this soft spot for France, but I received a call from Ambassador Hartley, Jane Hartley, and this was after the terrorist attacks of 2015 and 16, and asked if I would have interest in making a gift that wouldn't be, government to government, but people to people. And I told her that absolutely I would love to do that, that if she could just give me like 1 hour, I'll send an image to her. Because I already had created a couple years earlier, when the tulips that you see that were here at LACMA, when I was designing the piece, one photograph, I had these tulips in my hand. I thought, this is just like the Statue of Liberty, but, they're tulips. And I thought that it's a symbol of offering. And that I've always have seen these things, as I was mentioning early, like membrane. And, if I think of them, I could think of that it could be from like intestine or something, that it comes from a very profound place from within. Like a balloon dog, you could imagine that you would, see your kill, you realize that you see the gases expanding. Oh, I can make something with this. And you would take the intestine, start to fold things, bend them, and you could have a little balloon dog that then the community would find meaning in and rally around. It's the same with the tulips. So it's something that comes from a profound inner part of our being in offering, support and kind of shared values. So that was the spirit that I designed the piece. I was offered different locations to install the piece. And when I chose a place that was offered to me, they attacked me that I had chose that myself in some manner. There was such a grandiose type idea that I would put a piece there when it was what was offered. But eventually everything worked out. But I understood the democratic process of the French, the discussion of, if a work is going to be in the public view. So I understood what Manet went through, what Rodin went through, Daniel Buren went through. It's this history in French culture where everything is discussed out in the open, but then eventually everything comes to a certain, realization. And I'm really happy to say my piece ended up behind the Petit Palais in a beautiful, beautiful gardens. But it's this huge building where the Petit Palais was the garden, right where my sculpture is standing. And part of where the Grand Palais is where this very, very large building was that they had all the salons where, Manet would have showed his paintings, or Degas, or where they would have all these scandals.
By the way, it's not just the French. If you read the papers in Los Angeles about LACMA's building, it's not like it's equal opportunity.
Yeah.
And usually it ends well. And I always think that there's always a complicated backstory behind a lot of sort of new ideas. I mean, being in public is a complicated thing. And I think I take pleasure in the fact that everybody has an opinion. Like, it has to coalesce. And I do feel like artworks are changed by people interacting with them. I mean, Urban Light was not, it was a weird idea People did not know what we were doing or why I wanted it there or why it was going to be out front in the museum. 202 street lamps, what was it? And of course, now I'd be like, I could never take it away because everyone would be so unhappy. So I think public sculpture is one of the most interesting spaces. I know public sculpture that's been taken down, but it's risky and the rewards are super high, I think, if it becomes part of an urban landscape, which I'm 100% sure Split Rocker is going to be beloved in that way. So speaking of public sculpture, and also you talked about art could be anything. We had a conversation, when was it, last year, about art and science. And we talked about biology. We talked about also the cosmos. As I was walking over, I was seeing, I think it's a full moon. It's so amazing. And I realized, of course, you have art on the moon. So you are known for, new ideas and pushing the boundaries. That's kind of the ultimate public sculpture. So, that idea of putting art on the moon, that's maybe for the public of the future. Like, what was the attraction on that in terms of that idea?
I love the material sciences, and I love engineering. So, one of the things in making a work, you start to, even my stainless steel pieces, I've taken the production of that in a way as far as I can. I mean, I always try to take it further and further, but we've taken it to where we have no welding seams. Even though they're seams that are there, you can't see them. They're impossible to see. We have the highest reflectivity. We make our own steel, that we have just the most perfect type of amount of chrome and everything within the steel for the highest reflectivity. So this enjoyment of engineering and the material sciences was really one of the main drives, because, I worked with different materials, different aspects of engineering. The sculpture, not only did the lander make it, that's the important thing, but my work made it in perfect condition. And, it had to go through all the vibrations. It had to travel all the way from, the Earth to the moon, and to be able to make it there. And it should, I'm told from everything that I did, 200 years from now, look the way it did when it left, through the different techniques we used in coloring the piece, and the polycarbonate that we used for the sculpture, and the steel, the way we colored things, that it should look the same.
You're talking about your interest in materials science, and you are, one of the things you're famous for, maybe not the biggest thing, is that you are incredibly exacting in that sense. I think there have been collectors who've stomped their feet. I think of Pope Julius stomping his feet at Michelangelo for not finishing the Sistine ceiling. And I've seen collectors the same way with you, because you take the time it takes to sort of like play with that idea. I don't know, there's material science, there's perfection that people talk about in your work, that it's sort of so amazing, you're not even sure how it could exist. But it's one of the most significant features of your work that you push the material science to the limit. But I know you don't do it just because of some weird idea of perfection. I think it has something to do with it being alive, right? There's some place where it crosses the line, where you've invested so much in the material science that it becomes something else for you.
I think I picked up some of this from my father. And my father was an interior decorator. And so when he would design somebody's home, he would have graph paper. We didn't have the computer programs or the computers at this time, but he would lay out the graph paper and he would design everything. Everything would be scaled perfectly. He would not bring 10 different lamps to your home and, we're going to just try each one. We'll see which one works. No, it would have been thought out that, you need to have a shade exactly this size, and the base should be blue because it should be blue to go along with this gold over here. And so everything was thought out. And I realized from that my father taught me caring, and to be able to care. And I tell my children that and also my wife, Justine, that if we can teach anything to them about life, what's important, it's to care. Because when you care, you have self-respect, you care about others, you have empathy, and you appreciate, you're open to the world, you have a sensitivity. And so aesthetics, all of these things fall within the realm of caring. And so caring is the most important. Now, there are different stories that I like that also reflect on that. I always enjoyed in Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, the autobiography, or not auto, but the biography about Steve learning from his father, also in the backyard where they're painting the fence. And, the father tells him that they have to paint both sides of the fence. And Steve's kind of like, well, why? And his father tells him because the neighbor also has to look at their side of the fence, and it should be painted for them. And, of course, that's why Steve then went on to care so much about the design of any product that he made, or that if you would open it up, all the care would be in there for even the person that would be doing the repair work on it. I have only that chance, this moment, to make something and to show people that you respect them. I'm trying to show people that I respect you, and I'm trying my best to make something that's, worthy of you to view.
Yeah, that's like dressing well and to respect others, that idea. So it is, because I find the obsession you have with that as it is transformative. Somehow your objects are transformed by that you've taken it to such an extreme that there's kind of nothing left. They do become airy, actually. It's like the more work you put into them, you think that they would become burdened. And actually, there's a moment where they switch over in that lightness, like where you can feel in the balloon dog that the air it's empty in there or something. It is a kind of transformation that takes place. I mean, all art is, right, is the transformation of like materials, and earth is painting into something that's transcendent or transformative. And I definitely find that in your work. I know you said one time with your father too, the furniture store, you talked about how he used to change the windows all the time. And there was a sort of playfulness in the change and the fantasy. That's part of it too. There's a sort of fantasy of possibilities, I think, in your work that maybe came from your father too. I don't know what, you told me that story once of looking at the changes in the windows.
And my father was very supportive. He would put my paintings when I was young, 9 years old, 10 years old, in his showroom window. And he would sell my work, so he gave me a sense of confidence. But at the same time, when I was speaking earlier about serving, and at a certain point in your life, you realize that you still can accomplish the things that you want to within your own development. But part of that development is be able to serve. My mother's father was city treasurer in York. So I always had this kind of political aspect from my mother's side of the family.
So when you look at, just to come back to Split Rocker, these public sculptures, there's a sense of, these works have a sense of wonder, life, joy. Do you have hopes yourself for what the public will get out of this sculpture and will take from this gesture of yours and all this work over years and years and years?
One of the things that I've tried to do within my life is to remove judgment. And by removing judgment, it makes just everything that you come across source material. It's everything is there for you just to absorb and work with. If you make judgments, if you segregate, you're limiting resources. Instead, everything is perfect in its own being. And at some point, you have it there to be able to work with. So I hope that the work can help when somebody comes across my work in some form, that it helps them feel more open, that they have a desire, they have a sense of security to open themselves more up to the world, to trust in that interaction with the world, that they can open up and that they can gain from it and become stronger instead of being feared that they're going to be weakened by opening up, because they're only going to just gain and gain and gain connections. And, the more connectivity that we can experience, it's like the more we're emulating life and becoming more kind of 360 degrees in our involvement with existence. I love art history. The reason I love art history is to be able to connect across time and space. I know today we can go online, we can look at our phone, and we'll read about quantum, and we'll talk multi-universes, and but any of us that are here and that focus on things and focus on things very profoundly, on our interests, whatever those interests may be, whether they're mathematics, whether they're art, whether it's philosophy. But if you really focus on your interests, we all experience that bending of time and space and the connecting to a universal vocabulary. And I try through my work to share that with others, that they can experience a moment of kind of wonder, and hopefully that it can encourage them to realize that, again, culture is not something that makes judgment. Experience doesn't make judgment. We do that to ourselves. And just to help people be more open to life experience.
Thank you. I would like to encapsulate that as like the introductory text to your work sitting in front of our museum, because in a way that is the point of the museum, with its many cultures, to make people open to experience that, suspend judgment, to take in all the diversity of our world and our great metropolis of Los Angeles, which is kind of the most diverse metropolis on Earth. So I had an intuition about this sculpture, Split Rocker, and even tonight I'm sensing how it's even more relevant to our mission in Los Angeles and the world as an art museum. And I just want to say, I don't know how much gratitude I have to you for being so playful, to think about us, to work with Los Angeles, to offer that sculpture, to have this dialogue over 20 years. We now have butterflies on Wilshire Boulevard. There's going to be a lot of love and care involved in this. And I'm sure the gratitude that I have will be shared as the fences come down by a huge public of kids and families and just people from all over. So I just want to say thank you for that, and thank you for tonight.
Michael, thank you.